I hardly know how to start.
Well, you just tell us of when you had to go and look after Grandma in Padstow.
Well, I was 15, and I was sent to Padstow to look after my grandma. She was an invalid, and I had 2 uncles, and I had to take full charge of the house when I was 15. And I promised my ma that I wouldn't leave my grandma while she lived, and I didn't. And she died when I was 21. And one Sunday, we went out to a little village called St. Izzy to church, a friend and myself. We went out there to church, and we were going to a cottage to a friend's to tea. And the police constable was lodging there, which I didn't know. I didn't relish the idea of going in there. Anyhow, I suppose he fell for me, and when he came to Padstow, the next time to see a sergeant, he found out where I lived and came to see me, and that started. After a time we got engaged and promised that we'd be faithful to each other, and in 3 years' time we'd get married. We couldn't get married before because his salary was £1 a week. So, but we did. We didn't wait for the 3 years because he had the chance of a house. And there was such a number on the list that we accepted it. Anyhow, we built up our little home and we got on all right. And I lived in that little house for 8.5 years. And my son was born there. And it was a very happy 8.5 years. I got to know the people in the fishing village.
Where was it, Aunty? Where was it?
After Newland. After my son was born, everybody stopped and spoke to the baby. And they were very nice people. I got to know them very well. And I had a very happy time there. And then my husband was made sergeant.
How much was he getting as a constable? How much did you live on in those days?
£1 a week.
£1 a week?
I saved out of that for holiday every year. And for my clothes and my son's clothes. My husband didn't require very much because he was mostly in uniform. Well, we had our little holiday and went to Wales every year. And we travelled from Penzance to Barrydock, a pound return. And, well then, when he was made sergeant, we went to Tower Drep, another nice little village that was. We were there for 3 years. And we moved at the same rank to Camborne police station. And we were there 4 years. Then he was made inspector, and we went up to Cornwall Stratton. And I had a very happy time there. We were there during the First World War, all the war. And then we went from there to Helston, which I didn't care very much about. And we were there 4 years. Then he was made superintendent, and we went to Launceston. And we were there 3 years. Then we returned to Camborne at the same rank, and from Camborne he was made Deputy Chief Constable, and we went to Bodmin. After 8.5 years in Camborne then, as a superintendent, then we went to Bodmin as Deputy Chief Constable. And we retired from there. No, I didn't want to go on.
Then you went to live at St. Austell?
Yes, well then we retired and we settled down at St. Austell. My husband didn't live very long on retirement. So 7.5 years. Very happy time in the police force. I was in it with my husband for 40 years. And, I've seen a lot of trouble and unhappiness with different people. And, I had several prisoners in, and I had to look after them. And I had a halfpenny an hour for feeding them, a shilling for 24 hours. 3 good meals a day, and I did give them good meals.
What did you give them?
Because they were somebody's children.
Yeah.
And we don't all go the straight road, Some to turn on the crooked road. It don't matter whether they got good parents or bad parents. So they were someone's children, and I used to feed them well.
What did you used to
And
give
they'd
them?
come back to me, and they'd thank me for all my kindness to them. And while we were at Tower Drell, I had a poor old chap. He was a school teacher, but he was very eccentric, and the children worried him a lot. And he got at the window with a gun, and he threatened to fire to anyone that came by. Well, my husband was there with his squad of men at all-night duty, and he surrendered. He did fire at the man and blew his hand off. The man said, no, I know him, I can quiet him, he'll be all right with me. But of course they warned him that he fired at him and blew his hand off. But the man in the prisoner was called Dent. So he was surrendered. He had gone so long without food he couldn't last out. So he surrendered. They brought him up in the night. And they had to lay him on the floor in the cell, and I had to feed him with a drop of brandy and beaten up egg with a little drop of brandy in it, until he got around that he could eat some different food. So then he was before the magistrates, and he was sent up to Bodmin for a time until the next court. Then he was come down and tried again, and he wanted to see me. So I said, well, what is it, Cyril? What do you want? I want to thank you, he said, for all your kindness to me. I said, that's all right. I got a nice dinner for you today. He said, what have you got? I said, we're having a steak and kidney pie, and you'll have your share. Oh, that was lovely. But while he was with me in the cell, in the police station, I was upstairs looking out the window, and I seen the poor old soul creeping up around by the wall, and I thought to myself, well, that must be Cyril's mother, surely, Mrs. Dent, coming up to see him. So I went down and went out around to her, and I said, are you Mrs. Dent? She said, yes. I said, and you're coming up to see your son? Yes, she said. So I said, well, take hold of my arm, and I'll help you up. So I helped her up, and I put her in the guardroom, and I opened the little hatch. I said, Cyril, your mother's here. So I went in and made a cup of tea for her, and gave Cyril a cup of tea, gave her a little bit of something to eat, and then after a little while she went home. Then she come up again after a few weeks, and she said, Cyril, she said, they put me in the union. She said, and when I went in there, my hair was black and now it's white. They gave her a bath, and cleaned her up a bit, poor old soul. Oh dear, well, of course he had jail for, I forget now how long he had. I don't know, it was 2 or 3 years or something.
When you were first married, Auntie, how on earth did you manage on £1 a week? How much did things cost in those days?
Well, my dear, things were cheap, If my husband, you see, when we were married first, if he did a special duty, And that would be perhaps about 8 or 12 hours he'd be on duty extra. And that was 15 pence for that time. Well, you pick that up once a quarter. You see, well, then I used to put that in dried fruit. I always baked all my own cake and bread and everything. And I used to buy a quantity of stuff. You don't use any more because you've got it in the house. You've got to make it last. But we were never short of £1. And if there was a sudden death and they had the inquest, I had to find £1 for him to pay the people on the
jury.
Well, jury, I suppose it would be. And then, of course, he'd have it again, you see, he'd have it again as soon as the inquest was over. But I had to find the money for him.
Oh, I see.
And when you sent a prisoner was going up to jail, you had to pay all expenses.
Did you really?
And get it back the end of the quarter.
Good Lord.
I have taken him to jail.
You have?
Yes.
Good Lord.
But always had, if it was a female, of course I'd go with. I was police matron.
Oh, yeah.
And I always had a constable to go with me. Always had a constable to go with me because you never knew. You see, they might try to run away.
Yeah. So what sort of things did you used to eat, Auntie?
Always plenty of good food.
Yes, but what sort of meals did you used to dish up out of £1 a week? Now, what on earth could you have eaten for £1 a week?
Always had a roast joint for the weekend. A nice bit of sirloin. And that would be 7p a pound.
7p a pound?
And they used to have a bit of piece about £3. And that would be Sunday and Monday. Because I had a lodger.
You had a lodger?
I had a lodger as well. And I had 10 shilling a week from him. And then during the week we'd have a nice bit of brisket boiled. Make a boiled dinner. And then we'd have a pie. Sometimes a potato and turnip and meat pie. Or else a steak and kidney pie. And then I'd make steak and kidney pudding at times. And, well, we never had a fish dinner, although we lived in a fishing place. We never had a fish dinner. We didn't eat much fish. There was too much about. So, and they always had a fried breakfast. They had a cereal. Well, the cereal then was oatmeal. Yeah. They'd have a basin of oatmeal. And then they'd have bacon and egg and potatoes fried. Well, and then a bread and butter or homemade bun or whatever was going. Oh, we lived well, my dear. I always cured my own hams and bacon.
How did you cure your ham, Auntie?
And I used to buy half of a pig for 30 shilling. A pig weighing about, half of the pig would be weighing about 14 score. Sometimes 15 score. And that would be about 30 shilling. Well, I used to make brawn and ox pudding and cure my bacon and my hams. And I always rolled out a bit of common soda and worked it in with the salt and the sugar and the black pepper for curing my hams and bacon. And then that never rust. And it keeps lovely. And, it don't go hard.
Yeah.
Keeps lovely.
Yeah. Well, how do you cure a ham, Auntie? Tell us how to cure a ham.
Well, you must be careful of that there little knuckle. You must take out that there bone that fits in that round knuckle in the centre of the ham. Well, I had had so much salt for curing one arm now. Of course, we used to buy the salt by block. Penny a block then, you know. We used to have a couple of blocks would do for one arm. And so much sugar, common brown sugar, perhaps a quarter of a pound for one arm. And so much black pepper, nice bit of black pepper. And perhaps a couple of, or 2 or 3 ounces of common soda, washing soda. And roll that out fine as could be, and work it all in together with the salt and everything. And I never used any
saltpeter.
Yes.
Yeah.
That makes the meat hard.
Oh.
And then you work it in around the bone and the top of the arm, you know. You work it in, stuff it in. Well, and then after it's been in for, you put it in a pan to itself, if it's only one arm. And then after it's been there for perhaps 5 or 6 days, you take it up and rub it over again. And well rub in this around the bones. And then leave arm for about a month, between 3 weeks and a month.
Yeah.
But you don't leave the bacon for so long.
Yeah.
And then I used to buy a tongue, a bullock's tongue. Well, you'd get a bullock's tongue then for about 2 shilling. Oh, large tongue, and you'd have the root as well with it. See, well, the root, I used to clean the root, and that used to make lovely soup.
Oh, yes.
Well, then I used to wash the tongue, and rub it with sugar, brown sugar, and leave it for a day or two in the liquid. The sugar would make a liquid, you see, and I used to leave it in that. And then I used to take it up and rub it with salt, you know, and sugar. And I used to put it in in a smaller article, you know, so that the liquid would cover it.
Yes, yes.
And, I leave it like that for perhaps 3 weeks. And then take it up and boil it. Then take it up and skin it. And then I had a press that I used to put it in. You see, and screwed down on the top.
Yes.
That used to cost about 2 shilling.
Good.
You see, well then that would be cheese for them and different things I'd use that for. If they were going anywhere, I might make some sandwiches for them. But really, they'd like a pasty.
Yeah.
You see, well, sometimes they'd like a potato pasty and a bit of onion and something like that in it to flavour it. And sometimes we're having a pasty for tea or pasty for dinner. Some would like a licky pasty. We used to call them a licky pasty. Leeks, made with leeks, and nice bit of bacon over it and season it. And a dab or 2 of butter on the top. And sometimes we'd have a licky pie for dinner. And then another time we'd have a knuckle pie. In Cornwall, you see, they don't cut it off like trotters. You know, they cut you off a good knuckle. And you boil it well till it's tender. And then you season it nicely and put it in the pie dish. And make a nice bit of suet crust, the butcher's suet. And a nice bit of suet crust. And then you only want a little bit of lard with it. And really the crust and the pudding is delicious. And you do a vegetable with it, a potato and a bit of green stuff or whatever was good. And then I'd make a stew some days for dinner. And everybody liked my stew. I used to put a nice lump of butter in the saucepan. I used to slice my meat thin and put it in over the butter, pepper and salt, and cut up my onion small and put that and let that brown. See, move that. Keep it from burning. Let it shake the saucepan now and let that brown. Well, when that was after that was brown, I used to put a drop of hot water, and then I do my veg and put in, and I'd make little tiny dough balls and put in about the size of a walnut. And it used to be a lovely dinner. Everybody liked my stew. And I made my own bread and my own cake and my own scones and splits and everything. Used to buy my flour by the sack.
How much did it used to cost a sack, Auntie?
Oh, I can hardly tell you now, dear. Oh, maybe about 8 shilling, perhaps 10 shilling.
8 shillings a sack?
Mm. And I used to buy a sack of sweet turnips for 8pence. The old farmer would come down the road, shout, turnips, turnips, sweet turnips, and you go out and you have a sack of turnips, 8pence.
You didn't eat any fish at all? Didn't you used to salt any fish or anything like that?
No, not not after I was married. No, never used to. We used to have a bit of fresh fish sometimes for tea. That's about all we used fish. And not always then, you know, you got so much about you get sick and tired of it. Yeah. And the smell of it. But I couldn't eat that was bought in the shop now. Not after been living in a fishing village and you see it all brought in so fresh. Yeah. No, I like it. And
what's the proper way to make a Cornish pasty, Auntie? The proper way to make a Cornish pasty?
Well, you make a nice bit of pastry. You must make your pastry, and I like plain and shaley pastry. And then you make a turnip one, perhaps. I like a sweet turnip pasty and a bit of belly pork cut up and put over it. Pepper and salt, and it's lovely. Because when you get a good sweet, you know, and the belly pork, you got gravy in the pasty. And then I make a potato pasty, and, if it's new potatoes, when new potatoes come, I used to like a bit of lamb on the new potatoes. And then sometimes I make a pasty with a bit of beef and a bit of onion. Never put onion with the lamb. I make a beef. I never put all meat. We couldn't afford all meat. You had to put veg in it. And a bit of onion and a little white turnip pasty. All white turnips. You don't want any meat. Pepper and salt. And a nice bit of cream over them. And that's lovely. Your mother will tell you that. After the strike with the fishermen, I don't know that it was a strike of it, but it was a row with the fishermen because of the Sunday fishing. You see, and all the Lowestoft men and Tenby men and all those that came there in the fishing, you see, they would fish Sundays. Sunday didn't make any difference to them, and the Newland people wouldn't have it. And of course there was a riot. Well then, you see, they used to draft so many policemen into Newland in case there was any row. All came to my house.
Just a little what, Cop?
About, I'd have about 7 there. And they'd arrive about perhaps 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, I'd have up something for them. Some would bring what they wanted to eat and others didn't. So I told them that they'd have to bring their own food. I didn't mind giving them a cup of tea. I had the superintendent staying with me from Falmouth. He used to come of a Friday night and go away sometimes of a Tuesday and sometimes of a Wednesday, according how things were looking. Well, I had to put the constable out to sleep. I had 10 shillings a week from the constable, and I had to pay 3 and 6 out of that for him to sleep out. Because this superintendent from Falmouth, he would stay with me, and the constable, I said I had no room, and the constable said, well, I can go out to sleep. So, of course, he went out to sleep. Well, when they would come into their lunch, all those men had to go out from the kitchen, out in the yard. I didn't have very much from the super, although he had special duty night and day. He didn't give me more than about 6 shillings. So I said to my husband, I'm not having this anymore. He said, what do you mean? I said, all those men, I had them for 2 or 3 years. I said, I'm not having it anymore. Well, what are we going to do? I said, I don't know. I said, they can go down to the harbour office or they can go up to the church schoolroom. So they went up to the church schoolroom. Because that was up the road a little way, by that no one would know they were there. And, well then, I used to have the ambulance in a cupboard in the kitchen. And I used to, well, it worried me, it frightened me at times. If an accident was down the pier, they come up to the ambulance, well, they open my front door and rush in. I said to my husband, I said, I'm not having it. I said, that isn't going to be kept here any longer. I said, I'm not having people rushing in. Well, what are we going to do with it? Down to the harbour office, I said, and it'll be there ready. If there's any accidents, it doesn't stay in here any longer, but the little cupboard is still in the kitchen now. I was told the other day, it's still there now. Well, I don't know how to go on, darling. I lived to Camborne, the police station. There was a strike with the clay people up at Stenelees and Roach all around. And my husband was picked to go in charge at Stenelees. And he lodged with the person that kept the telephone. And she said, why don't you have your wife here for a little while? So I was staying at Pa then with, because it was holiday time all over. So he phoned and we went out there, we were out there for a fortnight. So I said to him, well, it's time for us to go back again. I said, because Willie's got to go to school. Back out to Par Station, we had to change there to go down to Camborne. And I got in the train, and my ma and da and my sister were sitting in the carriage. And they said, where did you come from? I said, I've been out staying to Stenelees. I said, what are you doing here? They said, didn't you have our letter? No, I said, I haven't been home for a fortnight and more. Oh, we'll come down for holiday. So I said, oh, well, I said, it's all right. I'm glad I've come. I wouldn't like for them to have gone and there was no one there. Yeah. So I said, there's nothing in the house to eat. But we soon fixed up and got everything ready and got their beds ready. And They had a nice little holiday and we quite enjoyed it, really. I enjoyed their company and they enjoyed being there. And, well, I think they were there for about 3 weeks. And then Ma and Da went to Padstow, their old home, and my sister went to Antwerp to meet her husband.
Which was Auntie Alice.
And of course, then after that, we went up to Barrydock for a little holiday, and I brought my niece back with me. Your mother.
My mother.
And oh, she was a lovely little girl, lovely looking girl she was. And I remember that she had a lovely little black satin coat. And my boy, you see, was nearly a couple of years younger than her. Must be more now. And he said, I'm not going out with her with that swanky coat on. Anyhow, they used to go round together, get on the tram every day and go off to Red Roof every day for a trip. And then her mum and dad came down, and they were down there for a fortnight. And we had nice little trips while they were there. And we went to Truro, and we went down to Falmouth by the boat. My boy had a bit of string and a pin onto the end of it, thrown over the side. And of course his uncle was laughing at him, and he said, if you laugh like that, Uncle Bob, you shan't have any fish. He was trying to catch some fish. So of course when we got down there to Falmouth, then Uncle Bob bought him a line. But of course he never caught no fish, dear boy. I can't say it anymore.
Say I don't like Vera. Say I don't like Vera.
I did, my dear. I loved her. She was a dear old soul, my great aunt. And she was a dear old soul and lived in Padstow. And she had ever so many chances, you know, and she refused them all. She lived with my grandma. And my grandma kept the White Hart and the Golden Lion.
2 pubs.
Yes. And her husband kept malt houses.
Good luck.
And then he went to America. You see, well, my great aunt and my ma, my grandma, they sailed 3 times out of Padstow. There was 3 shipbuilding yards in Padstow, a rope yard, a sail loft. Oh, it was full of work. But Uncle and my grandpa went to America, and they sailed out in a sailing ship, big sailing ship. They used to sail out of Padstow then for America. And they sailed out 3 times and came back again through the storm, all battened down, couldn't go any further. And of course my dad was in love with my ma, the boy and girl. And he said, when he seen the ship coming back up the river, he said, I'll have her yet. And of course he did. And he was always in love with my ma, up to the time he died. Well then, you see, my aunt lived with my grandma, and oh, she had lots of chances of marriage, good chances. No, she never married, and they were always on to her. One especially came home from abroad, and she said to me, my dear, she said, if I had only had him, I should have been riding in my carriage now. Oh, she said, the lovely sealskin coat he had on, plenty of money. But no, she said, I suppose he wasn't the right one. And they were always on to me about refusing this one and that one. You see, and then she said, well, the next one come along, I will have. And Uncle Henry came. And of course, she married him. She went over across to St. Minver and bought the furniture herself. He had a ship, a schooner, but he spent it all in drink. And she bought all the furniture, what they did have. They had a nice little home. And she got the living. And then when he retired from the sea, she set on a little shop. Used to sell groceries and make all the bread and buns and cake and things like that, you know. And I'd go down there of an evening sometimes and we'd sit down and he'd be telling some yarns, you know. And she'd be saying out loud, "Lies, my dear, lies, biggest of all lies. Lies, my dear." And he'd still go on with his yarn, not take any notice of it. "Oh, dear, lies," she used to say. "Don't take notice of it, my dear, lies. Biggest of all lies." And I suppose it was lies.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps he'd go out in the village of Padstow in the daytime and he'd come in and he'd say, Maria, she was called, and he'd say, "Raya, I seen a ghastly looking man up the street today." "Oh, what was he looking like?" "Oh, ghastly looking man." They'd take all the knives and that upstairs that night. And then he'd have a rope, he kept a rope under the bed in case of fire. He used to say, I said, "Well, what do you want the rope under the bed for, Uncle Henry?" "In case of fire, my dear," he said. "I'd tie the rope around the leg of the bed," he said, "and put the rope out the window and let Raya out." "Yes," I said, "you'd get out first." "Oh, no, I'd let Raya out." "No," I said, "you wouldn't, you'd get out first." I said, "Heaven all would go out with you." Used to have nice little evenings, you know, sometimes. She was a dear also. Lovely. She used to love to tell your love stories, you know, and she'd sit down and tell you all about them and he'd be there, you know, and you wouldn't take any notice. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. And she'd say now, "I'm going to do a bit of spring cleaning, my dear, upstairs. So I wish you'd come down of an evening and help me." I'd say, "All right, Aunt, I'll come down of an evening and help you." And I'd go down and help her. I'd be down there perhaps for 2 or 3 hours of an evening, upstairs doing spring cleaning. And she used to give me 4pence. And she'd wrap it up in a little bit of paper like if it was gold. And that was my wages for working. And I used to take up her washing every Sunday night, and it was all great big clothes, you know. He was such a great fellow, Uncle Henry was. And there was all his underclothes. And then, of course, there was hers, and there was the bed had to be changed. Then there was all her cloths, you know, that she had for her baking. And she used to give me 4pence for all her washing and a cake of soap.
You bought the cake of soap?
No.
Oh, she
gave me the cake of soap.
Yeah.
But I had a very happy time. Dear old soul she was, lovely. I dearly loved her. I would have taken her to live with me if it hadn't been for him. But you see, she died before him. But I couldn't be bothered with him. Yeah, she was a dear old soul. Oh, and she'd tell you her love yarns, you know, and her hair used to look lovely, one long curl down each side she had. That's how she used to wear her hair. And when she kept the shop, you see, the old people would come in that had been down picking cockles, you know. And they would have they'd have a little penny loaf, little cottage loaf, little penny loaf, and a couple of buns, 8 each, they'd be. And I'll have put a pen at the tea, Mrs. Oaken, and then she'd be weighing the tea out, or put a bit of sugar with it. They'd have that. Just run into a few pence it would. And then when they were going, "Have a pinch of snuff, Mrs. Oaken." "Well, yes, my dear, I think I will." And Aunt would have a pinch of snuff. Oh, dear.
Jean's grandmother kept a shop that sold papers. Yeah.
On the new road.
Yeah.
And she sold the newspapers and sweets and different little things, not knowing groceries and that. And she was a dear old soul, Mrs. Hutchins, and her son lived next door, and he kept a barber shop. They had four sons, George and David and Will and Michael, and two daughters, Cassie and Maggie. I think Maggie married the police constable. I don't know who Cassie married. But I know we used to be in love with called Tom Hopkins, the both of us. Well, she could give him a few sweets, but I couldn't. Anyhow, Tom used to do all the copying is from my paper. I said, I never knew, Tom, I was such a scholar. Oh, yes, he said, you were, Belle. He said, you know, I used to copy all from you. I seen him later in years, you know, but then he wouldn't have been my choice then, later on. Anyhow, David was a nice fellow, and he married a friend of ours. He was second son. And then Will, he died young. And Michael, he was my brother-in-law's chum, and he died young. And the old lady died. She wasn't very old. I think they were TB, you know. But they were a nice family.
Yeah.
Lovely family. I can't tell you any more about them. Because I left Porthcawl, you see. I left Porthcawl. I don't know what happened to them all after. David went to, George went to Barry to live.
Yeah.
And I kept a barber shop there.
Yeah.
And David met a friend of ours. Yeah. Well, I don't know anything about the others, do you?
Hello, Jane. That was your great-grandparents or grandparents?